The doorbell chimed at exactly 7 p.m. James Mitchell smoothed down his freshly ironed shirt, took a deep breath, and opened the door to what he hoped would be a new beginning. Instead, he found himself staring into the familiar hazel eyes of Olivia Carter, his ex-wife's younger sister. The woman who had once been his closest confidant. The woman who had disappeared from his life 5 years ago without a word. The woman who now stood on his porch with the same shocked expression he knew was mirrored on his own face. Neither spoke as the weight of their shared history hung in the air between them, proving that sometimes the most unexpected reunions can lead to the most profound second chances. If you've ever wondered if fate has a sense of humor, or perhaps a sense of purpose, this story will touch your heart. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about love, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways life brings people back together when they need each other most. James Mitchell had spent the last hour in a state of nervous anticipation. At 38, he hadn't been on a proper date in nearly 3 years, not since his divorce had been finalized and he'd become the primary caretaker for his daughter, Emma. Between his job as an architectural engineer and raising a 7-year-old alone, dating had fallen to the bottom of his priority list. But Emma had started 2nd grade this fall, and James had found himself alone in a quiet house more often, the silence sometimes deafening. His sister, Rachel, had been insisting for months that it was time for him to rejoin the land of the living, as she put it. You can't hide behind Emma's soccer games forever, Rachel had told him over coffee last weekend. You're still young, James. You deserve to be happy. I am happy, he'd protested, but even to his own ears, the words had sounded hollow. That was when Rachel had mentioned her coworker, a kindergarten teacher named Olivia who was smart, kind, and great with kids. Before James could object, Rachel had already arranged everything. A blind date. Dinner at his place, because James wasn't comfortable leaving Emma with a sitter just yet, even though his daughter would be at a sleepover at her best friend's house tonight. Just give it a chance, Rachel had pleaded. If it's terrible, you never have to see her again. Now, as James stood frozen in his doorway, he realized his sister had left out one crucial detail about his date. Olivia Carter looked as stunned as he felt. Her hazel eyes, so similar to her sister Catherine's, yet somehow warmer, widened in recognition. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She was thinner than he remembered, her chestnut hair longer, falling in soft waves past her shoulders instead of the practical bob she'd worn before. She clutched a bottle of wine in one hand and what looked like a children's book in the other. James, she finally managed, his name barely a whisper on her lips. Olivia. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. You're Rachel's coworker? Olivia nodded slowly. And you're her brother. It wasn't a question, but rather a realization dawning on her face. She never mentioned your last name. She never mentioned you were Catherine's sister, James countered, still unable to move from the doorway. An awkward silence stretched between them, 5 years of unspoken words creating an almost physical barrier. I should go, Olivia said suddenly, taking a step back. This is too weird. Something in her retreat snapped James out of his shock. Wait, he said, more forcefully than he'd intended. He softened his tone. Please. You're already here. And I made dinner. It was a weak argument, but it was all he could think of. The truth was, seeing Olivia again had unleashed a flood of memories, not of his ex-wife, but of Olivia herself. Of her laughter at family gatherings. Of her gentle way with Emma when she was just a baby. Of the one time, shortly before the divorce, when she'd found him sitting alone on the back porch after another explosive fight with Catherine, and she'd simply sat beside him in silence, offering quiet solidarity. Olivia hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. James, I don't think. Just dinner, he interrupted. As old friends. Nothing more. Were they friends? They had been, once. Before Catherine had filed for divorce. Before she'd moved across the country with her new boyfriend, leaving James with a 3-year-old daughter and a mountain of debt. Before Olivia had vanished from their lives without explanation. Olivia seemed to be having the same thoughts, her brow furrowed as she weighed her options. Finally, she nodded. Just dinner, she agreed. But I should tell you now, I had no idea it was you. Rachel only said her brother was a single dad who needed to get out more. James managed a small smile. That does sound like Rachel's assessment of my life. He stepped back, opening the door wider. Please, come in. Olivia crossed the threshold cautiously, as if entering a museum where she was afraid to touch anything. James took the wine from her, their fingers brushing briefly. He pretended not to notice the small jolt of electricity at the contact. I brought this for you, Olivia said, holding out the book. For Emma. Rachel mentioned she was 7 now, and this was my favorite book at that age. James accepted the gift, turning it over in his hands. The Secret Garden, he read. Emma loves to read. Thank you. Is she here? Olivia glanced around the living room, which bore evidence of a child's presence, a forgotten stuffed animal on the couch, a pair of small sneakers by the door. No, she's at a sleepover tonight. That's why I agreed to the date in the first place. James felt his cheeks warm slightly. I don't usually date? Olivia supplied with a small smile. Neither do I. My classroom keeps me busy enough. You're teaching kindergarten now? James led her toward the kitchen, where he'd spent the afternoon preparing a meal that had seemed impressive when his date was a stranger, but now felt inadequate. Olivia nodded, following him. For the past 4 years. After I left New York, I went back to school to get my teaching certificate. Left New York. Such a simple phrase for what had felt like abandonment at the time. James had been in the middle of the divorce, drowning in legal paperwork and Emma's questions about where her mommy had gone, when he'd reached out to Olivia for support, only to discover she'd moved away without telling anyone where she was going. I didn't know that, he said carefully, uncorking the wine. We lost touch. Olivia accepted the glass he offered, her eyes not quite meeting his. I know. I'm sorry about that. There was more to say, so much more, but James wasn't sure this was the time. Instead, he gestured to the dining table, already set with his best dishes and a small centerpiece of fresh flowers. I hope you still like Italian. I made lasagna. My favorite, Olivia said, and for the first time since arriving, her smile reached her eyes. You remembered. James hadn't, actually. It had been a lucky coincidence, but he didn't correct her. Please, sit. I'll bring it out. As he busied himself in the kitchen, pulling the lasagna from the oven where it had been keeping warm, James tried to collect his thoughts. Of all the women in Denver, how had he ended up on a blind date with Olivia Carter? The universe had a strange sense of humor. When he returned to the dining room, Olivia was studying a photograph on the wall, Emma at her last birthday, blowing out candles on a cake James had spent hours decorating to look like a soccer field. She looks so much like you, Olivia commented as he set the food on the table. Same eyes. Same determined expression. But she has Catherine's smile, James said before he could stop himself. Mentioning his ex-wife's name felt like dropping a stone into still water, ripples of tension spreading outward. Olivia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, I suppose she does. She took her seat, smoothing her napkin across her lap with deliberate care. How is Emma doing? With everything, I mean. James served the lasagna, buying himself time to consider his answer. Better now. The first year was difficult. She didn't understand why her mom left, why she only saw her on video calls. But kids are resilient. She's adjusted. And Catherine? Do they see each other often? James took a sip of wine, the rich flavor doing little to wash away the bitterness that rose whenever he thought about his ex-wife's relationship with their daughter. Catherine moved to California with Brian, her boyfriend. Now husband, I guess. They have a baby now. She makes it back to Colorado about twice a year. I didn't know she remarried, Olivia said quietly. Or that I'm an aunt again. You haven't spoken to her? James couldn't hide his surprise. The Carter sisters had always been close, despite their 5-year age difference. Olivia shook her head, her fork pushing pasta around her plate without taking a bite. Not in years. Not since everything happened with you two. James studied her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a guardedness that the Olivia he'd known had never possessed. She had always been the open one, the emotional heart of the Carter family, while Catherine had been all sharp edges and ambition. What happened between you two? He asked gently. Olivia met his gaze, something unreadable flickering across her face. We disagreed about some things. About how she handled the divorce. About Emma. She hesitated, then added, about you. The admission hung in the air between them. James waited, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. I thought what she did was wrong, Olivia continued after a moment. Leaving Emma. Leaving you to deal with everything alone. We had a huge fight about it, and then. I just couldn't be around her anymore. It felt like being complicit in something I couldn't support. James set down his fork, appetite suddenly gone. So you left too. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but they carried the weight of old pain, of reaching for support during the darkest time of his life only to find another empty space where someone he trusted had been. Olivia flinched as if he'd struck her. I didn't leave you, James. I left the situation. There's a difference. Is there? He couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Because from where I was standing, trying to explain to a 3-year-old why her mother wasn't coming home, trying to keep my job while suddenly becoming a full-time single parent, it felt a lot like being abandoned. Twice. Olivia set down her glass with enough force that wine sloshed over the rim, a small red stain spreading across the white tablecloth. That's not fair. I wasn't. I couldn't. She stopped, took a deep breath. I had my reasons, James. What reasons could possibly? I was in love with you. The words exploded between them like a grenade, leaving nothing but stunned silence in their wake. James stared at Olivia, certain he had misheard. What did you say? He finally managed. Olivia's cheeks were flushed, but her gaze was steady. I was in love with you. Had been for years, even before you married Catherine. And when you two were divorcing, I couldn't trust myself to be around you. To be what you needed, just a friend, just a support system, when what I felt was so much more. It would have been inappropriate. It would have been taking advantage of your vulnerability. James felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Olivia, quiet, kind Olivia who had always been in Catherine's shadow, had loved him? All those years ago? Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because you loved my sister, Olivia replied simply. And then you married her. And then you had Emma. There was never a right time to say, by the way, I've been in love with my sister's husband for years. So I buried it. I tried to be the best sister-in-law I could be. The best aunt to Emma. And then we divorced, James said, pieces falling into place. Olivia nodded. And suddenly you were free, but you were also broken. Angry. Hurt. The last thing you needed was her sister confessing feelings that would have just complicated everything. So I left. I got as far away as I could and tried to build a new life. Denver isn't that far from New York, James pointed out. A small, sad smile touched Olivia's lips. I was in Seattle first. Then Chicago. Denver was recent. I didn't know you were here. Catherine had mentioned you might move back to Boston, to be closer to your parents. I considered it, James admitted. But Emma was already dealing with so much change. I thought stability, same house, same school, was more important than being near my family. My parents visit often enough. They lapsed into silence, the revelations too enormous to process all at once. James felt as if he were seeing the past 5 years through a completely different lens. All those times he'd reached out to Olivia during the divorce, seeking her level-headed advice, her calming presence, had she been pulling away even then? Had he been unknowingly causing her pain by turning to her? I'm sorry, he said finally. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Olivia replied. I never wanted you to know. And now? The question slipped out before he could consider its implications. Olivia looked startled. Now? Do you still? James couldn't quite bring himself to finish the question. Olivia's expression softened. James, it's been 5 years. We're different people now. You're Emma's dad. I'm just a kindergarten teacher who accidentally ended up on a blind date with her estranged brother-in-law. Ex-brother-in-law, she corrected herself. It wasn't really an answer, James noted. But perhaps it was the only answer possible in this moment, with the weight of their shared past still settling around them. We should probably call it a night, Olivia said, pushing back from the table. This is a lot to process. James wanted to object, to ask her to stay, to continue this conversation that felt like opening a door that had been locked for years. But she was right. It was too much, too fast, too unexpected. I'll walk you out, he said instead, rising from his chair. At the door, Olivia turned to face him, her expression composed but her eyes revealing the emotional turmoil beneath. Thank you for dinner. And I'm sorry for dropping all of this on you. It wasn't fair. Life isn't fair, James replied with a small shrug. If it were, we wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips. No, I suppose not. She turned to go, but James caught her wrist gently. Olivia, wait. When she looked back at him, he continued, Emma has a soccer game next Saturday. At Riverside Park. 10 in the morning. She's getting pretty good, scored 2 goals at the last game. Olivia's brow furrowed in confusion. James, what are you? I'm inviting you, he clarified. To come watch Emma play. To see us again. Properly this time. No blind date surprises, no 5 years of unspoken history ambushing us at the dinner table. Just a new start. Hope flickered across Olivia's face, quickly tempered by caution. Are you sure that's a good idea? James wasn't sure of anything except that letting Olivia walk away again felt like a mistake he'd already made once before. I'm not sure of anything, he admitted. But I'd like to find out. If you would. Olivia studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. Okay. Saturday. 10 o'clock. I'll save you a seat on the bleachers, James promised. And James? Bring a coffee. The games run long, and the concession stand coffee is terrible. With that, she was gone, walking down his front path to her car parked at the curb. James watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then closed the door and leaned against it, his mind reeling from everything that had happened in the past hour. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Rachel. How's it going with Olivia? She's great, right? James stared at the message, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside him. If Rachel only knew. He typed back a simple response, we have a lot to talk about tomorrow.